The forest had a way of speaking to those who traveled it alone, especially at night when the wind brushed through the tall pines like old spirits, whispering forgotten truths. The lone Apache walked with steady steps, guided not by sight, but by the quiet rhythm of the land. He had spent countless seasons learning the signs of the wild. The rustle of small animals in the brush, the slow shift of distant hooves, the warning cry of birds overhead. Nothing in these woods felt foreign to him. Every scent, every sound, every patch of earth had a story he could read. But tonight felt different from the start. The air carried a heaviness that did not belong. The usual harmony of the wilderness was broken, replaced by an uneasy silence. The moon hung low behind drifting clouds, painting only faint lines of light across the forest floor. He tightened his grip on the worn leather strap across his shoulder and paused beneath a towering tree whose roots were thick and twisted. Older than memory itself, it was then he heard it. A faint cry, soft at first, like an animal in distress, though not quite the same. It was trembling, human-like, and filled with fear. His breath slowed. Cries like that did not rise from a place of peace. They came from pain or danger. He stopped to listen again, letting the forest speak. The sound came from deep within the valley, where thick brush tangled itself into walls of leaves. He moved forward with careful steps, avoiding branches that might snap and alert whoever or whatever was ahead. The lone Apache lived far from towns in the noisy world of settlers, choosing instead to survive by hunting, trading, and offering quiet help to travelers who lost their way. He did not fear people, but he had learned long ago that people carried trouble more often than the beasts of the forest. As he went deeper, cries grew clearer, though still broken. They rose and fell, like someone pleading in fear or pain. He noticed fresh footprints pressed into the damp soil beside the roots of a massive old tree, as if someone had run through in a panic. Small footprints. Lightweight. Someone had not been walking calmly. They had been fleeing. He crouched, tracing the marks with his finger, noticing how they shifted direction in a confusing pattern. Whoever left them was lost, frantic, maybe hurt. The lone Apache stood again and looked up at the ancient tree towering above him. Its bark was gnarled and swollen at the center, shaped like two massive trunks fused into one. A long, dark line split the center, almost like a wound in the wood. Sap trickled from it in slow beads, resembling dried tears under moonlight. Something about that tree felt wrong. Not dangerous, just wrong. As if the land itself was trying to hide a secret within its roots. The cries echoed again, sharper this time, and he shifted his attention toward them. He pushed through a thick wall of brush, branches scraping lightly against his skin. The forest grew darker the further he moved, canopy closing overhead until nearly all light vanished. He lifted his hand, touching the rough bark of another tree to guide his way. He could hear the cries more clearly now, mixed with shaking breaths and the sound of something dragging across leaves. It was not the cry of a beast, nor the voice of a grown adult. It sounded young, fragile, desperate. His heart picked up pace, though his steps remained calm. The wilderness taught patience, even when the spirit demanded haste. He followed the sound until he reached a small clearing, where moonlight finally reached the ground through a narrow break in the branches. The cries stopped the moment he stepped into the open space. Silence pressed around him. He breathed slowly, eyes adjusting to the dim light. The clearing looked untouched, except for deep claw-like marks carved into the soil, as if something had been dragged through recently. Grass was matted down in strange patterns, and the scent in the air was unfamiliar, neither fully human nor animal. He stepped closer and knelt beside the marks. They were not footprints, but grooves, long and rough, like someone had been pulled across the earth. He scanned the trees, listening for movement, nothing. Then the cry returned, this time louder and closer. Coming from behind a cluster of thick roots twisting out of the ground like trapped limbs, he walked toward it, slow but steady, pushing aside leaves until he found a narrow hollow between two trees. The space was deep, almost like the entrance to a burrow, but carved naturally by age rather than hands. A small figure lay curled inside, shivering. Just a silhouette, but clearly a young woman based on her fragile frame and torn clothing. Her hair was tangled with dirt and pine needles. She lifted her head slightly, though her eyes remained half-closed, and whispered something too faint to understand. She looked exhausted, terrified, and unable to stand. He reached out a cautious hand, but did not touch her. He wanted to understand what had brought her here. She tried to speak again, voice trembling. He leaned closer, trying to hear. The only word he caught was help. He looked behind him, scanning the forest again. If she had run here, someone, or something, might be coming after her. He could not see footprints other than her own. But the marks dragging across the clearing suggested she had not been entirely alone. There were no clear signs of attackers or animals nearby, but the woods felt tense, like holding a breath. The woman tried to pull herself forward, fingers scraping the dirt. She shook her head as if warning him. Her voice cracked, and she whispered something again, this time slightly clearer, but still softened by fear. The lone Apache leaned closer, not to frighten her, but to understand. Her words barely formed, yet they carried desperation strong enough to chill the quiet night. She was not hiding from the forest. She was hiding from something inside it. He rose slowly and stepped back, giving her space. The ancient tree behind her loomed heavier, its roots twisting like tightened muscles. The dark split in its trunk reflected faint light, and the sap glowed in a strange amber shimmer. The lone Apache felt something about the tree shift. Not physically, but in presence, as if the land itself had been disturbed by whatever had happened here. He looked back at the woman, unsure whether to carry her to safety or stay quiet and wait. Her breath trembled as she finally forced out a warning that cut through the silence. "Stay away from the tree." Her voice faded, and her body went still as she collapsed again. The forest around them seemed to tighten, holding secrets in every shadow. Before he could move another step, a new sound echoed from behind the ancient trunk. Low and unsettling, neither human nor beast. But something caught between the two, and whatever it was was not finished with the night. The lone Apache stood still, listening to the strange sound rise from behind the ancient tree. It echoed through the trunks in a way that made it hard to trace. It was not loud, yet it carried an unsettling depth, like the distant groan of something waking from a long sleep. The woman at his feet lay motionless again, though her fingers twitched slightly, as if she was still fighting a nightmare, even while unconscious. He could not leave her there, not while that sound lingered in the forest. He crouched and placed a hand near her shoulder, careful not to startle her. Her skin felt cold, far colder than the night air. She must have been lying out there for hours, maybe longer. Her clothing was worn and torn around the edges, suggesting she had traveled a long distance. She did not look like someone from a nearby settlement. Her boots were stitched by hand, but the stitching was uneven, as if done in haste. A small piece of cloth hung from her waist, a torn scrap of a larger garment with faded patterns. They were not patterns he recognized from any tribe he knew. He looked around again, searching for signs of others. If she had escaped from a group, they might still be nearby. If she had wandered from a town, there should have been wagon tracks. Yet the forest floor showed no marks other than the strange dragging trails near the clearing. Something about it felt less like she had been chased by people, and more like the forest itself had tried to hold her. The roots, the earth, even the bark seemed shaped by some quiet force. He lifted her carefully into his arms. She was light, almost weightless, as if fear had drained all strength from her. As he turned to leave the clearing, the sound behind the ancient tree rose again. This time it carried rhythm, not like an animal calling, but like something whispering through the wood. He fought the urge to look back. Whatever waited there was not meant to be seen yet. He carried her deeper into the woods. Moving toward a small shelter he kept near a stream where hunters rarely passed, the woman stirred halfway there, her breathing uneven. Once, she opened her eyes but shut them just as quickly, as if the world was too much for her to face. When they reached the shelter, he laid her on a bed of woven hides lined with soft grass he had changed only the day before. A small fire pit sat nearby, cold ashes from earlier hunts still inside. He gathered dry twigs and started a fire with flint and stone. Warmth returned to the clearing in slow waves. The woman shook slightly as the heat reached her. Her lips moved, but no clear words formed. He waited, giving her time. Fear often loosens slower than wounds. She finally managed a broken whisper, asking where she was. He answered with calm words, telling her she was safe for now. She pressed her hand to her chest, breathing deeply as if reminding herself she was still alive. Her eyes drifted toward the dark forest behind him, then back to him. She tried to sit up, but her arms trembled. He gave her a piece of dried meat and a small cup filled with water he collected earlier from the stream. She hesitated before taking it, as if unsure whether she could trust him. But hunger soon overpowered doubt, and she drank slowly, each swallow steadying her breath. He waited until she finished before asking how she ended up in the depths of the forest alone. She stared at the flames for a long time before answering. Her voice cracked often, but she spoke enough to reveal she had traveled from a distant settlement past the western ridge. She said the people there had begun leaving one by one, some vanishing in the night, others fleeing without explanation. She was among the last to go. When she left, the settlement was nearly empty. Homes abandoned, fires cold, horses gone. She did not explain what caused the people to disappear. She spoke as if the land itself had swallowed them. The lone Apache listened silently, noting how her hands trembled when she tried to speak of what followed. She mentioned seeing something in the woods that did not belong, something tall and still as a tree, yet not one of the forest. She said she felt watched each night as she traveled, though no footsteps followed her. When she tried to describe what chased her before she collapsed near the ancient tree, she shook her head as if refusing to bring the memory back. The lone Apache understood enough. Whatever she fled was not a simple animal or bandit, and she believed it was still searching for her. Night deepened around them, and the fire crackled with low sparks. The forest outside remained quiet, too quiet. No owls called, no crickets sang. Silence often carried more meaning than noise. He wondered whether the woman had brought danger with her, or whether the forest had already been watching long before she arrived. She soon fell asleep, exhausted beyond resistance. He stayed awake by the fire, sharpening his spear slowly, listening to the land. Shadows moved faintly between the trees, but only from the shifting flames. He did not doubt something was out there. The ancient tree still lingered in his mind. Its strange shape and the dark seam down its center. He remembered stories told by elders long ago, tales of land that woke on its own, of old spirits tied to wood, soil, and stone. Not spirits of ancestors or hunted beasts, but ancient forces that shaped the world before people named rivers or drew borders. Most dismissed such tales as myths meant to keep children close to campfires. He never believed them entirely, yet the forest that night felt old in a way that stories never captured. Near dawn, the woman woke again. Her eyes opened slowly, and she looked around with confusion, as if unsure whether she had dreamed everything. She sat up this time, stronger but still shaken. She asked if the tree they passed earlier was real, as if hoping he would say no. When he confirmed it, she grew pale and held her arms tightly around herself. She said the tree was not just a tree. She claimed she had seen something move within it. Not branches or animals, but something inside the wood, like a figure trapped. She said she heard whispers when she passed it earlier in the day, long before she collapsed. She tried to run, but roots rose in her path and slowed her down. She believed the tree was alive in a way no tree should be. He did not speak right away. The forest often played tricks on tired minds, yet her fear felt too real to dismiss. Before he could answer, the morning wind shifted and carried a faint sound from deep within the woods. The same low tone he heard near the tree. It traveled through the branches until it faded into silence. The woman looked toward the forest with wide eyes. She whispered that whatever was in the tree had followed them. The lone Apache stood, gripping his spear. The fire burned low, and the sun had not yet risen fully. The forest stood still, waiting. He took a step forward, ready to face what lingered among the trees, unaware that the truth waiting in the depths of the woods was far older and far closer than either of them knew. The lone Apache felt the weight of the woman's words settle over the fire like a cold wind. She stared into the shadows between the trees as if expecting the forest to answer her fear at any moment. He did not rush her to speak more. Sometimes fear needed space before explanation. He stepped to the edge of the clearing, scanning the undergrowth. Morning light had not entirely claimed the land, and the trees still clung to the last veil of night. He listened for movement, but silence clung like a skin over the forest. Even silence had sound, a soft hum of life beneath it. This silence was different, too deep, like a breath held too long. When he returned to the fire, she was sitting upright, her hands gripping the hides as if she needed to hold on to something solid or else fall away. She asked him what he believed lived in the ancient tree. His answer was simple. He did not know yet, but he knew the forest had rules. Something out here was breaking them. She looked weak and still, yet her fear held strength. She wanted to remember more, to explain why she feared the tree. She spoke of the settlement she fled, a small place built along a river bend where the soil was rich enough to grow corn and roots without much work. Families came there for a fresh start, drawn by the promise of new land. For a time, she said, it was filled with laughter and hope, but then things changed. At first, just one family disappeared overnight. Their cabin was found with the table still set for breakfast. The horses were tied, the firewood stocked, but no footprints led away. People believed they moved on quietly. Perhaps trouble had called them elsewhere. But then another family vanished. And another. The settlers held meetings by torchlight, arguing whether to stay or flee. The few who left early took to the river, not the forest, claiming the trees watched them when they packed. The woman did not leave then. She stayed with a small group who believed the danger would pass, who thought fear was twisting their minds more than any real threat. She regretted staying. One night, she woke to whispers drifting through her cabin, too low to make sense of. She stayed quiet at first, thinking it was a dream. Then a shadow passed her window, tall and unmoving, like something standing just outside, waiting for her to open the door. When she finally gathered courage to look, the shadow was gone. But the whispering did not stop. It came from within the walls, the floor, the earth. The next evening, she and two others decided to leave. They each took a different path through the woods, hoping at least one would find safety. She had not seen the others since. Her voice trembled, not because she was unsure, but because remembering made the fear fresh again. She said when she ran through the forest, she felt roots shifting beneath her like traps. The trees seemed to close in. She lost track of time and direction. All she remembered clearly was the ancient tree she ended up under, the same one he saw. She swore she saw a shape inside it. Not carved, not imagined, alive. The lone Apache listened with calm patience, though inside his thoughts stirred like leaves in wind. He did not dismiss her fear. The ancient tree was unlike anything he had known. His people believed that some trees held spirits, protectors of the land, symbols of long memory. But spirits protected. They did not chase. He asked if anyone in her settlement had ever spoken of the land being cursed. She said, an old trapper who lived alone by the river once warned them not to build so close to the heart of the woods. He said the forest was older than any map showed and did not want settlers carving it apart. They ignored him. The trapper disappeared a week later. They laughed about him wandering off. No one laughed after the second family vanished. The Apache stood and added wood to the fire. Flames rose higher, pushing back the cold morning. The woman wrapped herself in the hide he had laid out, the colors returning faintly to her cheeks. She asked his name, but he told her names were not needed tonight. Not until they both understood what waited outside the circle of firelight. He said he would go back to the ancient tree. He needed to see what lived inside or beneath it. He could not protect the land, or her, without knowing the truth. She begged him not to return there. Her voice carried a depth of fear that struck him stronger than her earlier cries. She said the tree was watching now, not through branches or bark, but through the forest itself. He promised he would move with caution, not alone. He wanted to first follow the dragging marks they had found in the clearing, see where they led. If someone else had been taken by whatever stalked the woods, he needed to find them. She whispered that she hoped he was strong enough. Not strong in muscle or weapon, but strong in spirit. She said the forest broke spirits before bodies. The day moved along slowly. The woman rested while he prepared. He sharpened his blade and gathered herbs from the river bank, ones known to weaken sicknesses that fed on fear. The silence never lifted. Even when the sun climbed high, no bird dared to sing. As the afternoon stretched longer, he noticed something else. The trees around the shelter had shifted slightly. Leaning inward as if listening, he finally set out, leaving the woman wrapped in the safety of the firelight. He moved with precise steps, guided by memory and instinct. The dragging marks were faint in places, but still led toward deeper shadows. He followed them past thorny brush and over narrow ravines where dry streams once ran. The air grew cooler the further he walked, and the smell of soil thickened. He found a torn piece of cloth snagged on a root. It matched the woman's garments. She must have been dragged far before freeing herself. But there were other marks too, ones that did not belong to her. Long, smooth trails, as if something heavy had slid across the earth without legs. He crouched beside one and traced its curve. The edge was too clean, too intentional. Branches rustled above him. He looked up fast, spear ready, but only a raven perched on a high limb stared down at him. Its eyes held a cleverness, unlike most birds. It cawed once, sharp and harsh, before flying deeper into the woods. He followed its direction, feeling it was more than coincidence. Soon he reached a place where the marks vanished. The earth was bare and smooth, as though nothing had ever disturbed it. Even fallen leaves avoided the center of the clearing. It reminded him of the ancient tree. The ground here felt old, older than the forest around it. The silence was so deep it felt alive. He bent down and pressed his palm against the soil. It hummed faintly with warmth, pulsing like a heartbeat underground. He stood again slowly. Something beneath the forest floor was living, waiting. He turned to leave, but before he could take more than 2 steps, a distant cry broke the silence. A voice full of fear. Human. The sound echoed from the direction of the ancient tree. His grip tightened around the spear. The woman had been right. Whatever hunted her was not done yet. He moved quickly, not running, but covering ground with determined stride. Branches snapped behind him as if footsteps chased from afar. When he reached the ridge above the clearing with the ancient tree, he saw shadows shifting below. Moving from the base of the massive trunk outward like dark ripples, the long seam in the bark appeared wider than before. The sap glowed brighter. The air carried a low groan again, familiar and wrong. The Apache stepped closer, breath steady, but heart pounding. The forest was no longer silent. It was speaking, and the sound came from the ancient tree. He stood at the edge of the clearing, realizing the main conflict was not only about saving the woman, it was about protecting the land itself from something buried deep inside the forest's oldest roots. The ground trembled lightly under his feet. He braced himself as the dark seam in the tree pulsed again. Whatever was inside was still waking, and he was now close enough to see it happen. The lone Apache stood just beyond the clearing, watching the ancient tree pulse with a slow rhythm that did not belong to wood or sap. The seam down its center seemed wider than before, as though something inside pushed against it from within. The moonlight filtered through the branches, falling across the ground in broken strips of silver. Every shadow felt alive. Every breeze carried a warning. The forest was no longer just watching. It was reacting. He gripped his spear tighter and moved forward a step at a time, careful not to break branches underfoot. The cries he heard moments earlier had stopped, yet he felt the echo of them lingering in the air. Someone had been here recently, close enough to be taken, or close enough to escape. He searched the ground for recent tracks and found faint impressions leading toward the tree. They were too small to belong to a grown man, and they did not match the woman's trail. That meant someone else had been in the forest, someone he had yet to see. The air cooled sharply as he neared the tree. It felt like stepping into a place untouched by sunlight or seasons. The bark at the base was darker, smoother, as if shaped by hands rather than time. When he reached out and pressed his palm against the surface, warmth radiated back, not unlike touching living flesh. The tree did not feel like wood. It felt like something breathing, He pulled his hand back slowly. The forest behind him rustled with distant movement. It was impossible to tell if the sound came from animals or from the same force that stirred the tree. He turned to scan the trees when suddenly the forest fell silent again. No wind, no rustle. No sound at all. The silence broke with another cry, faint but filled with fear. It came from deeper in the woods, not from the ancient tree this time. He pivoted, moving quickly toward the sound, weaving through thick roots and narrow paths. The forest grew darker the further he went. Moonlight faded beneath a canopy so dense the sky disappeared entirely. A clearing opened ahead, surrounded by tall pines that seemed unnaturally close together. In the center he found something he did not expect. A torn bundle of fabric lay draped over a fallen log, small enough to belong to a child or young girl. Beside it, he found broken branches and marks in the soil that looked like someone had been dragged. The trail led away from the clearing, deeper into a part of the forest even he rarely traveled. He knelt beside the torn cloth and picked it up. The stitching was the same uneven pattern as the woman's garments. Whoever this belonged to likely traveled with her before they separated in panic. He thought of the settlement she spoke of, how families vanished without trace. Maybe this was one of them. Maybe more than one? The forest held too many unanswered questions. He followed the dragging marks downhill toward a stream. The water flowed quietly, though its surface barely reflected the sky. He crouched beside the bank and touched the surface. The stream felt colder than it should at that hour. Not cold from weather, but cold from something beneath it. He stood and continued along the water's edge until he saw a shape. Lying partially buried in reeds on the opposite bank, he crossed the stream in 3 steady strides, water rippling behind him. The shape belonged to a young boy, half conscious, his arm tangled in vines. The boy's eyes opened when the Apache approached, but they looked unfocused, as if he had been walking in a dream. His lips trembled when he tried to speak. Only fragments of words escaped, but enough to understand he had fled something in the woods. The Apache untangled the vines and helped the boy stand. The child leaned against him, too weak to walk on his own. The boy whispered that he saw people inside the trees. Not behind them, not beside them. Inside them. He said their faces moved in the bark like trapped reflections. He said he heard them whispering his name, even though he never told anyone he entered the forest. The Apache felt a chill that did not come from the night. The forest seemed to tighten around them again. He needed to take the boy somewhere safe. The woman still rested at his shelter, but now he had more than just her to protect. He carried the boy back toward the riverbank, moving fast yet careful. When he reached higher ground, he stopped. The forest path leading back to his shelter was no longer the same. Trees leaned in new directions. Root lines had shifted. The trail he expected to see was gone. The forest had changed its shape. He set the boy down and studied the land. The forest did not move randomly. It moved with purpose, as if guiding him or trapping him. He chose a new direction based on the flow of water and moonlight, trusting nature more than instinct. As they walked, the boy whispered that he heard footsteps behind them. The Apache heard nothing, yet he believed the child. Branches cracked somewhere behind a distant hill. Not like a single step, but a slow series of breaks, as though something large shifted its weight across fallen wood. The sound faded, then returned from the opposite side. The forest was moving around them. He quickened his pace, carrying the boy again when his legs gave out at last. They reached the clearing where his shelter stood, but something was different. The fire he left burning low had been smothered. Smoke rose in thin, silent ribbons. The woman was no longer lying on the hides. Instead, she stood near the edge of the clearing, facing the forest with her back toward him. Her posture was rigid, her arms hanging loosely at her sides. He approached slowly, calling to her softly so she would not startle, but she did not turn. She remained still, staring into the trees. When he reached her side, he saw her eyes. They were open, yet unfocused, as though she was listening to something he could not hear. She whispered that it was calling to her. Not a voice, but a pull. She said she felt like she remembered something she had forgotten, something buried in the woods. The boy behind them trembled and clung to the Apache's arm. He whispered that she should not follow the trees. But those who listened never came back. The woman stepped forward, drawn toward the shadows. But the Apache held her by the arm, grounding her. She blinked and gasped, as though freed from a dream. When she looked at him, tears filled her eyes. She said the voices were growing louder. She said the forest did not want to harm them. It wanted something else. Something the settlers brought with them. Before she could explain, a thunderous crack echoed across the clearing. The ancient tree in the distance split wider, the sound carrying through the woods like a drum of the earth itself. A gust of wind swept through the clearing, whipping leaves into spirals. The forest lights changed, shadows stretching long across the ground. Branches shook violently, and roots slithered beneath the soil like serpents waking from slumber. The woman stepped back, gripping his arm. The boy covered his ears and cried out, saying he could hear the voices again. The lone Apache stared toward the ancient tree, knowing the moment he had feared was coming. Something inside that tree was breaking free. The forest around them shivered as though the ground itself remembered what had been buried long before any settlement existed. He positioned himself between the woman, the boy, and the direction of the ancient tree. The night grew darker, swallowing the stars. Mist rolled through the trees, curling around his legs like smoke from a hidden fire in the distance. The ancient tree groaned once more, the seam now glowing from within. Whatever waited inside, roots was rising, and the final confrontation was close. The forest shook as the ancient tree split wider. But the lone Apache stood his ground. He felt the woman and the boy trembling behind him, afraid that whatever had been sleeping beneath the roots was finally breaking free. The glow inside the trunk flickered like a trapped lantern, pulsing with a rhythm that felt more like a heartbeat than light. The ground rolled beneath his feet in slow waves, as if the earth itself was adjusting after centuries of holding something captive. He planted the end of his spear into the soil. He did not raise the weapon to strike, only to anchor himself and those behind him. He spoke softly to the woman and the boy, promising they would not face this alone. His voice steadied them. They drew closer, holding on to his presence more than his words. The ancient tree released a final crack, then went silent. The forest stopped trembling. Even the wind froze. For a long moment, nothing moved. The world held its breath. Then the glow faded gently from within the tree, not extinguishing but dimming like an ember losing heat. The seam closed little by little, the bark knitting itself together until the tree looked old and still once more. No longer pulsing with restless energy, the boy whispered that he could not hear the voices anymore. The woman leaned against the Apache, exhausted but calmer. She said she felt something lift from the land like a heavy weight finally pulled away. The Apache stepped toward the tree with slow, careful steps, ready for another rise of power, but nothing stirred. He pressed his palm to the bark again. This time, it felt like wood. Cold, aged, still. The warmth was gone. Whatever had been trapped within seemed to have returned to the earth, not to harm but to rest. He looked back at the woman and asked what she remembered now that the fear had loosened. She hesitated, gathering her breath, then explained that settlers had unknowingly built their homes on sacred land meant to stay untouched. The ancient tree was not a creature. It was a guardian, a vessel holding memories of those who once lived in the forest long before towns and trails existed. The whispers she heard were not meant to harm. They called her because she tried to flee without understanding what the land was asking for. She said some of the settlers vanished because they tried to force the land to serve them. They took more wood than needed, cut roots to clear ground, and burned sacred groves to make way for farms. The old force in the forest did not punish them. It simply reclaimed what belonged to it. Some settlers returned to the earth peacefully, others left in fear, never speaking of what they saw. The boy listened quietly, rubbing his arms as warmth returned to his body. He said he remembered seeing faces in the trees, but now those faces felt distant, like wind-shaped illusions rather than trapped souls. He believed the land had been calling them to stop, not to disappear. The lone Apache understood. Some places were not meant to be claimed, only respected. As dawn approached, birds began to sing again. The first rays of morning light pierced the canopy, painting stripes across the clearing. The forest slowly awakened to its natural rhythm. The The silence broke in gentle ways, no longer heavy with dread. The woman let out a long breath and whispered that she felt safe for the first time in many nights. They walked back to the shelter together. The fire had burned low to soft coals, but the warmth felt welcoming now. The Apache helped the woman and the boy sit by the flames while he gathered fresh water from the stream and prepared to start a small meal. The land felt different. The tension had left the soil, replaced by stillness that felt earned rather than forced. As they ate, the woman asked what they should do next. She no longer wanted to return to the abandoned settlement. The boy shook his head as well. He did not want to walk back to empty cabins and unanswered questions. The Apache told them they did not have to return unless they sought closure. Some stories were better left where they ended. He offered to guide them out of the forest when they were ready. They asked if he would travel with them farther, maybe to a new settlement, or along the river toward towns that still held life and community. He told them he belonged to the land, but would walk with them until their path became clear. His life was built on moving with the seasons. It's not on staying behind walls. They rested through the morning, allowing the forest to breathe without fear. When they began their journey outward, the woods did not fight them. Trails appeared where before there had only been tangled brush. The trees parted in gentle ways, as though offering safe passage. The boy carried his own weight now, no longer needing to be held. The woman walked beside the Apache, steady and calm. When they reached the ridge overlooking the open plains, they stopped and looked back one last time. The forest stood tall, ancient and wide, no longer whispering warnings. The ancient tree was hidden among countless others, just another trunk in the endless green. Yet they knew where it stood, and they knew it would stand long after they continued west. The woman placed her hand over her heart and thanked the land quietly. The boy waved at the trees as if saying farewell to a friend. The Apache remained silent, but his silence carried respect. He knew the forest had not been an enemy. It had been a keeper of balance. They continued walking until the grasslands spread open, and warm sunlight brushed their faces. The path ahead stretched far beyond sight, full of new beginnings rather than fleeing shadows. The woman smiled faintly, not with relief alone, but with hope. The boy ran ahead, laughing as he chased the wind. The Apache followed close behind, steady and watchful. In time, they would find a place to build new homes. Not in forests that whispered warnings, but in valleys where the land welcomed them. They would meet new people, share stories, and carry the memory of the ancient tree as a reminder that some places must be honored, not claimed. Their journey became no longer about survival, but about life. The forest watched them go, quiet and calm, returning to its deep slumber of roots and seasons, and the ancient tree stood tall, guarding the land not with fear, but with peace.